Pete hearing this decides to, so this is again, Pete hearing Benny suggest the better positioning, decides to make the incredibly mature call to use a Discord function I had frankly forgotten existed, server-side muting Benny. Oh
no.
My guild has had one server
That's
mute incident
fucked up.
in our history, and it nearly killed us.
If someone gets fucking server muted in progression, there needs to be like a guild long talk to figure that the fuck out, because that's like that's insane.
Yo, welcome to episode 29 of the PoddyC. This week in things that I was supposed to remember to say during the podcast but didn't, so now I have to record an intro to go in front of the podcast after the fact. We have a new Patreon series. It's called PoddyT, where we talk about like drama and stuff, like guild drama, that kind of stuff. Power Infusion has already made an appearance. There's some good stuff in there. So if you're interested in supporting the podcast over on Patreon, we'll have Fronk will put a little link thing in the description along with like 30 other stuff we made him link. So it's going to be a big description this episode probably. Anyways, I know how much you guys love it when we start these episodes with me on full screen. No other news this time. I will let you now enjoy the rest of the show.
We can probably start with that. Also, I have a crazy new outro to the video. I feel like hitting a Podious would go crazy.
Did you steal that from the comments of the previous one?
He stole it from the comments. He stole it from the comments.
That is crazy.
What's crazy is I would have thought Max came up with that, but you guys outed him, and now I think he's less creative. He like got a point and then lost it right away. Good work, guys.
Yep. Podious.
Well, the way he presented it as well, like it kind of implied it was his idea as well.
Dude, that's what you do as a streamer all the time. You like someone says something super funny in your chat, and you let like chat go crazy for a few minutes, and you pull it back later, and that one guy's sitting there like, what the fuck? And then everyone else is like, wow, Max, that was so funny.
That's a classic in the watch party. You just steal the joke from the chat, and then everyone in the call laughs, and you're just like,
oh,
nice.
Yep.
And then the one guy from the chat is just blowing up.
Like mad as fuck. Yep, true. All right, let's get it started.
All right. It's episode 29 of the PoddyC. We're joined this week by our replacement cat, once again, Growl. Welcome to the show.
Yo, what's up, guys? Replacement cat here.
Is this his second episode or third?
I don't know. We do so much like content that we do all the tier list or drafts and stuff, so it's kind of all gets muddled in my head. But yeah, Dorky is busy trying to win TGP, so I don't know, next few weeks we may have to replace him, but we've got Growl here to be even equally as good of a cat. And there was a big interview thing that went on Wowheads that I think has got there's a lot of meat on the bone here for us to dive into. It's a pretty, what were your guys' thoughts? I was actually pretty encouraged on reading this. There seemed to be a lot of kind of, first of all, they just announced that there was a lot of cool stuff coming, right? But then also they seemed to sort of acknowledge things to be problems that they sort of hadn't acknowledged were problems before. I thought that was pretty encouraging, although, of course, there were a few things where they were basically like, yeah, we see this as a problem. We're not really going to do anything about it, but we think it's a problem, which is less encouraging.
It's come a long way from in that alpha Q&A of them being like, yep, we're chilling with affixes, and now that I'm just firmly convinced now that I think Bybee was the guy doing that interview, who, by the way, is excellent. Like, every time I've heard him talk about something, it sounds really good. But he gave that answer of like, yeah, I think we're happy with our mythic. Well, not happy. They didn't say that. They were like, I don't think there's any planned big affix changes. They said this back when alpha was released, and I clearly that was they either changed their mind completely or he was answering a field of questions about everything, and maybe that one just like he wasn't fully informed on what they were planning on doing. But I feel like this had the craziest news for high mythic plus players ever, really. And I kind of want to dive into that first, like the very first. WoW had released it yesterday in two segments. They released an initial segment of just the 2 Mythic Plus questions. Then I'm like, wow, this is crazy insightful. And then they were like, there's a whole nother one later. And then they released this huge bunch of questions. I feel like if I were to do an interview and ask them the things that I hear the most from my chat, they pretty much covered everything. Like, they went over every big question that needed to be asked. So is that also where you want to start, Dratty?
Yeah, I think Mythic Plus makes a lot of sense. I think the affixes is a pretty cool place to start. I don't know. Growl, have you? What's your take on affixes in general? Are you an affix purist or hater? Or I know there's a pretty wide spectrum there. So what was going into this? What would you have like said about affixes the way they've been so far?
I think we've talked about it a lot. It's been a hot topic for a while. I think there's some need to change things from week to week. I think that no affixes, I don't think is the solution. I haven't really come up with a good solution though. I've been kind of in the think tank lately about it. Over the last 2 expansions, I feel like when it comes to reducing the impact of the affixes and balancing them, they've come greatly, they've made great strides in terms of both of those. And affixes still feel really bad in a lot of different scenarios. So I think we've gotten to the point now where I don't think the solution is to keep nerfing the affixes and keep. I really love the way Squishy worded the question of, it seems that the closer that we get the affix does nothing, the happier people are. And I feel like we're getting to the point now where affixes are becoming zero, and we need to sort of like take a step back and think like, what is the purpose of the affixes right now? And I don't know. I don't have a great solution.
Yeah, the answer they gave was really interesting, right? Like, basically, hey, affixes being impactful is good for the low-key audience and bad for the high-key audience. So we're going to... I mean, reading between the lines here, they said they're going to announce something soon. We don't know exactly what it'll be, but something along the lines of making it so that they impact low keys but not high keys somehow. Like,
yeah,
I don't know how.
That is what I found super interesting. And I feel like if you're a high Mythic Plus player, which it's a very, very, very small percent of the player base. I mean, best argument would be it is 1% of all people who do Mythic Plus at all. But they're very popular on Twitch, and like there's a big community surrounding it. That you should be the happiest ever from reading this, because they basically said for the whole time that High Mythic Plus has existed, we have never intended for that to be the goal. And you can tell that that is absolutely true, because their reward structure ends at what is now a 10, what used to be a 20. And there's really no reward for going higher than that, other than a title you get 5 months later for being one of the top 0.1%, which again is a very, very small amount of people. So they were saying, for so many years now, we've been trying to appease both audiences, the people who are doing, the vast majority of Mythic Plus players who are doing these for portals and doing this for filling out their vault, and then people who are doing it because they just love doing keys and are having fun and want to push themselves farther, or people who are going for that title. And they're saying every change we've done has tried to be like a one-size-fits-all solution, like something that will help them and also benefit high key players. And they're saying we want to just look at high keys differently. So for the first time ever, it looks like Blizzard is going to be designing a high key experience where for the entire time so far, it has been just something that happened to exist when the entire thing was designed for a completely different set of... And then what blew my mind about that is they were like, well, our completion data shows that like things like bolstering and raging are not nearly as impactful. Some of the affixes people in high keys don't even really like. And I initially read that and I'm like, there's no way that's right, because I constantly hear from these people. And then I thought about it more and it's like, oh wait, it's exactly right. Like in a +5 key on live, no one's actually kicking these spells anyway. So raging doesn't do anything. It just like, makes it extra not likely that you're going to be able to get kicks on these spells. Same thing with bolstering, and it does actually change week to week, where stuff later that's like less impactful, more impactful, I think that affects all levels, but like it at least varies the experience, where like the varying at the high level is like, oh, we don't play, rather than, oh, this is different, right? Because it's still possible. So I don't know. I want to hear definitely a lot from Growl on that, but I imagine if you're a high Mythic Pluser, that has to be the best news you could possibly hear, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could yap forever about this. I think there's 2 important things to unpack. Number one, as a person who already does high keys, I mean, I read it the same way, right? They seem to be doing something that will make the high key experience better. I'm all for it. I do high keys. I have tons of people on my friends list that are in title range. I don't worry about all of the low-level keys. I question very much that the low-level key players like affixes. I don't like the way they worded some of the things here. So first of all, when we talk about participation, when we talk about people who are gearing characters and, the average M+ player, I think it's really hard to use participation as a measurement of like, see, most people come back week to week, because for the most part, people are filling up their vaults, people are gearing their alts, and I don't really think for the average player, the affixes change that much their participation level. I do think it can have an impact on how fun it is, but ultimately, if their main goal is to gear their characters and fill their vault, they're going to play roughly the same amount from week to week. The other thing I don't like is talking about the balance between the affix. They talked about that success rates week over week with affixes. Like I said, I think balance of affixes has come a long way. And if anything, I think balance of affixes isn't really the main sticking point. Although a lot of people do talk about balance of affixes, I feel like the main issue is that a lot of, like, many affixes just aren't fun, or they have certain situations where it feels very unfair or oppressive, like there's no counterplay. And nobody's really saying, like, oh yeah, bolstering's 2 key levels higher, right? Mostly what people are saying is bolstering just isn't fun because we have to pull smaller, and also, like, bolstering creates a scenario once or twice in a dungeon where you have a big mob that you can't necessarily avoid bolstering, and then it just kills 3 people and it feels really, really bad. And I don't really like that they didn't address fun, and they constantly just talked about balance, participation rates, success rates, and this affix is harder than this or easier than this, because I think a lot of the discussion with affixes isn't about difficulty, although some people do mention difficulty. I think it's much more about fun. And I feel like to say, oh, at low level keys, these affixes have the same success rates, it's like, well, yeah, because none of these affixes are really going to wipe you on a lower key. And so, yeah, I would imagine that the success rates of most dungeons are very, very similar across week to week to week, regardless of the affixes. It doesn't really make the affixes good, though. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do think participation can be a bit of a proxy for, like, like there are some affixes that cause participation to drop off hugely in high-end keys, and if it doesn't do that in lower-end keys, it's at least, like, evidence that it's less bad there. But I do agree that it's not really positive evidence that these affixes are fun. I think there have been some examples of affixes that are, like, actively fun in low keys. It's not a weekly affix, but I remember Prideful was for me, the affix that's most emblematic of this, where it's like, if you're doing like a weekly 10 back at the time with Prideful, like it was a really fun affix in that setting, because it was like a slightly more challenging pull, and you weren't doing the dungeon at a level where, the just relative to your gear, a slightly more challenging pull was nuclear difficulty and was just going to one-shot you or whatever. And then you got the power up afterwards, and you got to go crazy with cooldowns and blow up the next pull you did. And I always thought that I had a lot of fun that season doing weekly keys because of Prideful. Like, Prideful was sweet in those keys. And then you get to high keys, and it's like, this really has a lot of problems, right? Like, the Prideful itself is too hard. The pulls that we need the Pride for, then if we wipe to them, it sucks. And the 20% thing is really restrictive for routing. But I do think there is some space.
Restrictive for routing, like, I feel like a lot of people think about affixes in a sense that they remember them how they were when they were very geared. And Prideful, I think a lot of people will have actually the opposite memory, that Prideful in Pugs was actually miserable. And it would be constantly like, if you have a hunter that butt pulls something, or a tank that doesn't know what's going on, you're spawning Pride in the middle of packs. While you're max gear level and you're doing a +10, yeah, sure, Pride is really chill because, oh, we spawn a Pride, let's just mow it down. But for the most part, the progression experience, and I think the first month of Mythic Plus, especially the expansion, but each season, is very, very important, because this is when a majority of the people are playing. Most people don't play the game for the full 6 months of the tier. And that first month of progression, I think people sometimes forget about affixes. A lot of people have been joking about, oh, bolstering doesn't do anything in low keys. Oh, raging doesn't matter if your team doesn't kick. If you're doing the first week of raging, I'm interested to see on the first week of the War Within, when it's, whatever the affixes are, I think a lot of people are going to be like, holy crap, these affixes are hard. Just because when you're progressing on a key, when your gear level is partly what's holding you back, I think you do really, really feel the affixes. And it's only when you dramatically outgear something do you start to, brush them aside or power through them.
Yeah, I think it could just be a difference. Like, there is I think a large set of that part of the player base that does M+, that is in the lower keys, like, are explicitly not trying to do progression keys. Like, they're trying to do farm keys and stay there, and affixes that are more impactful or, more like Prideful even, can be really fun in that setting, where it's like, it sort of injects a little bit of extra key levels of difficulty in a sort of fun, different way. But then that, I agree with you that, yeah, it doesn't matter what the key level is. If it's progression key for you, then it's going to suck in the same way that it does for geared people in high keys at the end of the season.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
also like, sorry, go ahead.
well, also something they kept. I didn't pay too much attention to the like participation metrics for that reason, but I found it just fascinating for them to talk about the like success, like they look at like which affixes actually are griefing groups, like which affixes like lower your completion rate of these keys, and they mentioned bursting, and I thought about that initially, and then I was like, okay, that makes total sense because like at a high level, you have people that have like stone form, you have people that like know what they're doing. You're not gonna like chain stacks over and over again. You have healers that are better at the game where like if it's something you're not really paying attention to at a lower level, it can just you don't have a mass to spell, whatever. Like there's so many ways to deal with it. And then they mentioned that versus something like bolstering, and I was like, okay, that is a very interesting way to look at it. And I think low key versus high key. I kind of wanted to ask your opinion on what this would look like, Growl. But this is kind of a larger conversation. I maybe want to keep it till later, and I'm going to do it now.
Send it.
Okay. So they said they're basically not going to try a one-size-fits-all solution. They're going to, maybe for the first time ever, look at high Mythic Plus and lower Mythic Plus differently. And previously, the game has only been designed for that level of Mythic Plus where rewards are in the game for it. And then now they're going to give you something else. What would you like that to look like, Growl? If you could cook on that at all, like, have you thought about anything at all, like what that could look like? Is it removing depletes? Is it finding a way to balance the weeks better? Do they remove affixes above a certain key level? Do they do the JB cook where it's just, it's just time after a certain point and it doesn't keep scaling? Like what have you given any thought to what you would want that to look like?
Oh yeah, so I think there's a bunch of different topics there to unpack, right? There's depleting, there's the timer, but I think when it comes specifically to affixes, I'm skeptical that they'll do this, but my ideal scenario would be after plus 10s or whatever level that gives you rewards. When you put the key in the holder, there's simply a drop down for what level 4 affix and what level 7 affix you want. So there's still Tyrannical Week and Fortified Week, and there's still, you have the keystone with the dungeon and the level. And then you can decide, right, whether and so for the 4% affixes, or the level 4 affix is the damage buff you get and the way mobs are buffed. And then the level 7 is the on death, right? So as a group, you can sort of decide, okay, well, a lot of our damage comes from, our fire mage. We're going to do the fire vulnerability. Okay, bursting is the easiest on death. We're just mostly going to play with bursting all season. But it does give you some options, right? For example, let's say the Fire Mage affix makes casters really hard. And so maybe on these two dungeons where there's just way too many casters, Ruby life pools, we'll say, it's not even worth picking the Fire Mage. Let's buff our other guy. It's not as good, but we don't have to deal with these annoying casters in this dungeon. Or, maybe in some world you decide that you want to put bolstering or something other than bursting on a key. Or if you happen to play let's say you play, we're playing Bear Druid and Rogue and Fury Warrior and Hunter, let's just do the physical damage buff anyway, because this is good for our comp. And even though most people play with the fire damage buff, like, we play, this silly comp and we want this buff. And I think that would be my ideal solution when it comes to, like, reducing the week to week of affixes, is being able to choose the level 4 and the level 7 when you go into the key.
What do you think, Dratnos?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would very quickly lead to almost all high keys being done with the same affixes, pretty much. Like, I'm pretty sure that if you gave the whole community, like, we would probably do like 90% of our keys on, I guess this season it would be like, what, volcanic and bursting or something would be the two affixes we'd throw on every key, or entangling or something, and that would be, would that be a bad thing inherently? Maybe not. I mean, maybe that's better than the alternative. I don't know how else you reduce the week to week, variance between keys besides something like that. One thing that I think one of the days on beta, it was like Tyrannical was at level 2 and then Fortified was at level 10. Imagine if that was just every week and it was like some weeks are Tyrannicals at 2 and some week Tyrannicals at 10, and then the Fortified is at 2 and Fortified's at 10, and so like in low keys up until 10. There's still Fort and Tyran weeks, but then once you get past 10, Fort and Tyran is just every week, and that way we don't have any pulls or bosses that are like impossible on some weeks because of Tyrannical. It's just baked into every single level. Yeah, like Fortified and Tyrannical are just both in there on high keys, and so you don't have them being separate anymore. I think that, because I think Fort and Tyran is one of the biggest things that varies from week to week that is left unbalanced in dungeons, right? It's one of those things that could be fixed in any given season by a really thorough pass on every boss in every dungeon, but very rarely is. And if it was instead just always Tyran and every week, I think that would kind of remove some of that difference. I don't know.
I don't think. I actually think I've always been an advocator of Fort Tyran. I think that's one of the things that, even as a high key player, makes the dungeons feel different week to week. And it's not so crazy that it's like altering your routes dramatically, but it is kind of changing the way that you are doing it. And it does sort of come back and forth, right? It's not like you only play on one certain week. I mean, the biggest question that it comes down to with regards to affixes is, let's say there's 2 worlds of Mythic Plus, right? One world, you play 6 months out of the season. Affixes are sort of bogging you down, but they're changing and making the experience, quote unquote, feel fresh. You're playing for 6 months out of the season, but you have lots of frustrating moments and friction with those affixes. Or a world where you play for the first 2 months of the season, but after 2 months, you have mostly your max gear, you've done mostly the keys that you want to accomplish, and you're done and you move on to something else until the next season. What is the better world, right? And I don't think there is a definite answer. Maybe you guys have one. What world of Mythic Plus would you guys rather live in?
I mean, I like any changes they can do to make it so that people who, I know there are a lot of people who like want to do M plus on some weeks and then don't because it's a dead week. And I think that Blizzard should definitely change the system such that people who want to do M plus, have a team that kind of wants to do M plus, don't log out because there's a bolstering on the keys that week or whatever. So I do think that they can cater to people that want to do M plus year round without necessarily adding in stuff that, FOMOs everybody into feeling like if they want to stay competitive with WoW, they have to log in every week. I do like that you can, be done for a season. And I don't think that would necessarily go away if they got rid of dead weeks and push weeks, which is, I think, a lot of the goal here.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what they said affixes are the purpose of. Like, affixes were never meant to, like, add difficulty they're not supposed to be, like, the main source of difficulty. They're supposed to be variants. I remember asking some Mythic Plusers a while ago, would you guys rather just have no affixes and do this? And then a couple of them were like, yes, immediately. And then I remember Goop was like, I don't know, guys. I feel like we do this for 3 weeks. Let's say there's no depletion, too. That's what people ask for. And then we're just farming the same keys. We get capped out. There's no more homework keys. And then you're just, like, doing MDI pulls of a dungeon to hope it works. And if you're not doing that, then you're kind of just, there's no reason to even play until you get more gear. And it's like, that could mess up the thing. Like, I think there is some thing people like now. Mythic, but like High Mythic Plus is especially employed by people that like play WoW the whole season. Usually, it's not people that usually just play for like a month or two and quit. It's usually people that are like using WoW to entertain themselves for the entire season, and in some cases as like their only game in general. So you have that, and then like now there's just going to be less to do. Like I think some of those people like just logging in, having a group they play with. Yeah, it's going to mean some homework keys, but at least we're doing some keys, playing the game, stuff like that. If there's no reason to go back and do stuff like that with the removal of depletion or by making the weeks feel very similar as just an option, I'm not saying either of you really advocated for that. You pointed out negatives in it. It's just like I could see that for some people disliking it because just simply the reason for them to log in and playing the game, even though it would probably be a quality increase, but like you would notice a less quantity of needing to do keys, and that would need them to find other ways to entertain themselves with that time, and that'd be an issue. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I think previously in WoW, when gearing takes months, when you're 2 months into the season and you're still like trying to get items and get your Titan Forges and whatever, I think that having Mythic Plus die off early on would feel kind of bad. When everyone kind of gets bored of not having affixes. But I think with how fluid and fast the gearing system is now, like I don't think it's realistic for even someone who doesn't really raid that seriously to be very close to best in slot within a month, spend a month pushing keys, play a few weeks, maybe even 2 months, and then halfway through the season being like, well, I'm happy, let's just move on. And I think like you can remember seasons very fondly and have a lot of fun. But the problem is, for those people who are WoW enjoyers who want to play, who come on month 5 or month 6, who are, maybe I'm bored now, I have time, I want to try and get title, the group finder might feel dead. And so I'm not really sure. I think I really wish we could like just test it to see. I'd kind of be interested because the problem is we've never had a world with no affixes, right? We
Mhm.
don't know what that would look like when every week is the same. So when we say, "Oh, group finder will be dead. Oh, people will be bored," we're just guessing. We don't know if,
Yeah.
maybe everyone will be like, "Wait, this is really fun," and you get title on this guy, and then now you make it alt, and now you play this, and now people are trying. Who knows? Maybe it'll just make the game way more fun, and people, participation rates will go up. Like when they talk about participation rates being roughly equal for week to week, it's like, well, we don't have a sample case of what that looks like with no affixes or anything. We're just looking at bolstering versus sanguine. Like you could have sanguine every single week of the season and the success rates and the participation rates would be equal, but that doesn't make M plus fun. Like the fact that it's sanguine every week and it's balanced every week doesn't make it good.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole. I also wanted to ask you guys something too. If they're also like rethinking Mythic Plus, something that I think is very interesting about raids is that they have like time gated achievements for them. So like a way to look at this would be like you can get cutting edge or Hall of Fame, right? There is a Hall of Fame is like you need to be one of the first teams to do this thing. The race to world first is the race to world first, right? Is there a world of Mythic Plus? Like right now, the Race to World First equivalent, the Hall of Fame equivalent, is figured out in the last minutes of the season, which lasts 5 or 6 months. Is there a way to add some kind of cool, prestigious, difficult? I want to be the first person to do this as part of the new High Mythic Plus specific design. Do you and what would or could that look like? Have you guys thought about that at all?
You could do like first 400 teams to time of 15, first 400 teams to time of 20 type thing. Like you
I
could
think that would
have
be hype.
yeah, I mean there was I got some of that vibe like back in Shadowlands and BFA. I pushed for Realm first 15 in those seasons. Like because you could
Yeah,
only do that in
yeah,
season
yeah.
one of those.
Hmm.
And Realm first is like a little bit different, obviously, because that varies from realm to realm. But I remember getting that in those seasons, and being like, "Wow, this is so cool!" Right? Like we're doing like a. I mean, it sort of felt like similar to getting Hall of Fame and Raid on a different but the similar kind of vibe of like pushing for something, knowing there's another team trying to get it as well, right?
Yeah.
And then like beating them to it. Obviously, Hall of Fame is a little bit more linear on your realm, so it's not quite the same. But I think some sort of system like that, I don't see why you couldn't have that in M plus. I think M plus could use a lot more stuff besides just title as well. Like if you look at it, you get Keystone Master, right? And then in theory, there's Keystone Hero, but there's not like any rewards for that. And then there's a huge chasm, and then there's title, right? And it's like, we have
Yeah.
basically a reward for like, top 20% or something, like wherever the Keystone Master, Keystone Hero cutoffs are. And then there's just this incredible space where in Mythic Raid, for instance, that's where like 4 out of 9 Mythic, 5 out of 9 Mythic, 6 out of 9 Mythic
Correct.
are all
Yes.
differentiated from each other. And we don't have that differentiation in M plus. So I would love to see all kinds of stuff like that. I think that M plus is like you got 10 times as many players as Raid, and it's got like one recolored mount every season, and a title and a half.
Yeah, well, I feel like they would have to do something for that because, and I've heard people say this too. Yesterday, I went over this interview on stream and I saw some people being like, well, isn't them like, so far they've created Mythic Plus for, and this is not a made up number, like literally the 99%, like everybody but the 1%. That is what it's been designed for so far. And High Mythic Plus has just existed. Whatever works for that, we'll make it work, whatever, infinitely scaling system. Like now they're saying for the first time, like maybe there's two different versions of this. Like clearly they're two different games, and like maybe we can do something. And I heard some people in my chat being like, "Well, isn't this them just designing for the 1%?" And I feel like it's like a chicken before the egg thing. The reason that you don't see more people going above what is now a 10 and what used to be a 20 is because of what Dratnos is talking about. Like in games, oftentimes the game designer will give you rewards to lead you in a certain direction, right? They have given you nothing to lead you above a 10 right now. You get your portals, you got your tier piece already, you got your keystone achievement, and then it's like, why on earth would you go above this? Does it give you better gear? No. Does it give you better, like more crests? No. Does it gives you nothing
Gives you
outside
less
of the,
crests usually as well.
yeah,
It's like less per hour, and then if you deplete, you don't get any. It's cursed.
yeah. Yeah, so there's nothing in the game that makes you want to do that other than a title that happens 5 months from now. So why are you doing this thing? You only do it because you love the game, right? And there's a lot of things that people would love to do that they never even know to do because the game doesn't push them in that direction. So I would just love to see that chasm that you spoke of. If they're going to work on something for High Mythic Plus, sure, make it better for those people that already exist, but also give people a ramp to get there. Give them the Naimus and the Laradars and the Smolderons, as you would say, to lead you to what is the Tindral, rather than, just expect you to like get all your stuff and then it's like this massive jump. Like I think there's a bridge that could be had there.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think more rewards the better. And I think that while right now you sort of have like the gear incentives for doing 10s, and then that's sort of it, unless that really, really hooks you in and makes you want to push higher keys, or you have friends that are doing it, like there's not really a lot of incentive to go from 10s to 12s or 10s to even like 15s or whatever, right? While, if you enjoy the system and you're having fun, yeah, but no, I mean, I completely agree there with, but the thing is, like, I feel like they've been consistently doing that in terms of adding portals, adding the title, adding aspect crests and a way to get better gear. So while I 100% am on board with I wish there was more rewards, like I do feel like they've been slowly giving M plus more love and appreciating it a little bit. So I just hope they continue on in that. And I think that grouping of people between 10s to 17s or whatever the current season is, I think definitely deserve more love.
Yeah. Agree that there's also, I agree with both points that like they shouldn't design the game just around the high end, but there are a lot of people that I think are medium end that would like to push up a little bit, and giving them a push to do so, and especially giving enough people to get a push to do so that they can find groups, is like so good for creating that. And then also, if they separate how the game is designed for high keys versus low keys, we can do some more stuff it's better for the low key players as well, right? Because if there are cases where like, oh, this wants to be balanced this way for high keys and this wants to be balanced this way for low keys, instead of doing some kind of compromise, they can just do it differently in the two environments, right? And the low keys can get their full, more impactful bolstering if that's really what they want, which I agree with you, Growl. I don't know if anybody pushing +6s that wants bolstering to go back to a permanent duration health and damage buff or anything like that also affects bosses. But if that's what the people are clamoring for in the low keys, and I haven't heard that feedback, then they can have that, and the high key players can get the bolstering that's plus 0.2% damage only or whatever, and then we're all happy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking for the people here. If they create this magic bubble where the top 1% get to play and have fun, and the other Mythic Plus, you guys have to suffer, sayonara. I'm going to go play in it and I'm going to have fun. I just think that this should extend to lower keys. I do think that the idea that, they're designing for the top 1% here is like a total meme, because that sort of mindset has to do with sacrificing and making the game worse for the other players. That's almost like the argument that you should delete Tindral and Fyrak because they're too hard. It's like, well, just, those bosses aren't, Mythic Tindral is not made for you, having the fact that the content exists doesn't mean that, this is designing for the top 1%. They're not changing the way lower keys work. If anything, they're reworking the system that's better for lower people, right? They're saying, okay, you can get pretty decent gear without even having to worry about affixes or a timer or anything. And I actually think that this whole system of making M0s, of being able to get hero track gear for doing untimed no affix content, is a great conduit for allowing them to experiment in the M+, because now it's like, if you're doing M+, you're basically, you're doing it for a slight step up in gear, but you're mostly doing it because you want to do M+. Even in like, 3s to 4s or whatever, because you can get pretty, like, if you just want to get into raid and you're not playing that seriously, you can literally just do M0s and then hop right into heroic and be in a heroic guild or a normal guild or whatever, and not have to worry about M+ at all.
Before we move off of M+, they did mention one thing. There was one more question. We broadly covered the first two. The third one was about stops. Dratnos, do you have that pulled up? Can you, just for the viewers, can you kind of summarize what that question was asking, and then also just generally their response to it?
Yeah, okay, so Wowhead was basically like, look, stops have been a big thing, and this has got a big imbalance on classes with and without stops and players who use and don't use them. Are there changes coming in War Within? And Ian and Morgan Day basically were like, yeah, we've talked about this a bunch. Stops is something that has sort of come up over the last few expansions, but it's not really how WoW mobs work or the rules are supposed to work for WoW. In general, you're supposed to have a spell go on CD if it gets cast or if it gets kicked, but not if if you as a player get stunned during a cast, for instance, that cast doesn't go on CD, right? And so they're going to change it in War Within so that the general rule rather than the exception is that a mob doesn't have its abilities go on CD unless it finishes its cast or it gets kicked, right? So if you use an AoE stun, the mobs will come out of that AoE stun and just keep casting, which, yeah, they talk about that being a good idea. And it's something that has been met with a lot of skepticism, I think, from the player base. I think, for me, I would say the most optimistic thing I could say about this is if they make it so that most casts from most mobs don't have nearly as much lethality associated with them, then this could probably be fine. But as it stands right now, if you move mobs from going on CD after they get stopped to not going on CD after they get stopped, you don't reduce the disparity between the people who have stops and the people who don't. You increase the amount of stops that are needed to fully stop a pack from going off, right? If you have a pack that has a bunch of mobs casting Shadow Bolt that, Shadow Bolt does 70% of somebody's health or something, like, now it's not just like, oh, we need to stun this twice, right? And then put it on CD and then stun it again in 7 seconds. It's like, oh, yeah. We need to stun this. We need to have stops for this for the next 20 seconds. We need to continue stopping this pack until it dies, which you do that sometimes. Like there are some spots in M+ right now where you can do that and you can just literally chain stop a mob to stop it from doing something that doesn't behave like this. And I think that unless they are very careful to make sure that mob casts are much less threatening, the unimportant cast, right? The Shadow Bolts, not the poison death volley or whatever, like something that you're obviously supposed to kick, supposed to stop, but the just regular filler casts are so lethal in a lot of dungeons that I'm very worried about this philosophy, because I've always enjoyed the mobs going on CD when you stop them. The other thing that I'm really worried about, dude, is the stopping into a kick. Like you can if I know there's an important cast and I press kick and you stunned at the same time and now it isn't on cooldown and my kick is on CD, like that is a despair situation. And I think that is going to be a very common pug experience if they do switch to this philosophy as well. So I'm not thrilled about this answer. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I mean, what you said about what you said about the reason that they changed this initially is because it's just way too convoluted in terms of trying to understand. I know they said, oh, we want to make this simple like your cast work, but well, like, okay, you have a cast and then you stun it and then it recasts. Well, what about something that isn't a kickable cast that you have to stop, that you can't use a kick on? Should that go on cooldown? What about abilities that have a 1 second cast and then they channel after that, right? Some of these abilities would be like if the mob starts casting it but you stop it too early before the channel starts, it doesn't it recasts, but then if you wait for the channel to start, then and it just creates all this huge knowledge gap and these annoying rules. And of course the situation that Dratnos mentioned of, well, you stun a cast because you're like, oh no, this is a cast, and your teammate actually was kicking it. And now you like basically griefed your team by stunning a cast in a pug where you're not even in comms. And it's like, yeah, I feel like my biggest issue here is they have this line at the end of it that's like, well, this shouldn't be the case for lethal spells. Like, oh, a lethal spell, we're going to look at the packs. And it's like, yeah, from what I've seen in M+, I just don't really believe that's going to be the case, that they're going to be going through each individual pack. And I mean, I would love this, believe me. I'm going to hold my word here and hope they do it. But also the idea of what's lethal, like, okay, let's say you're doing Ruby life pools again. I keep using this example for casters, but you have the fire bolts in the second boss room area. Well, those aren't lethal, but there's also an insane amount of unavoidable damage going on in your party. And if you get bolted when one of that damage event goes out, you're dead, even in like a pretty low key. Like, but they just see, oh, well, this bolt only does 40% of your health. It's not that lethal. And it's like, well, I think I question their ability to judge and handpick the situations. And I think the one-size-fits-all rule, while it does make stops very, very OP, it was very easy to understand and also allowed us to sort of cover up for very strange packs and like stuff that just had way too many kicks or stuff required. So, yeah, I don't know. I am skeptical of the change as well. I'm not really... I don't know. I guess we'll just have to wait and see the dungeons.
Yeah, speaking of stops, a lot of people in the podcast may be happy to hear. In the most recent beta build, they also removed all of the extra stops from Demon Hunter that they added this recent patch, which has made the tank meta very interesting for a while. I think everyone was wondering what was going to happen with that.
Yeah, eliminated sigils, right? The so no more double silence, no more double misery, no more double chains.
Which is insane. Yeah, insane that was ever the case. There's people also, just so this doesn't get lost in history, this is going to be etched in our podcast tome forever, that people were saying the best way to handle the DH thing was to give every other tank that same amount of stops, which is just one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard suggested. But before just like Blizzard's philosophy on stops, I also did a bit of Mythic Plus over the weekend, and they did do a good job sometimes of highlighting when something was going to kill you. It was like as if they like put a ring around a mob that let you know, like, oh, if that goes off, you can just look at it and know if that goes off, you're going to die. I think that's actually really good. But the overall thing, I completely agree with everything you two said. I just want to echo a point that I brought back after seeing the dungeons, and basically what I'm referring to is it seems like the dungeons are trying to kill you and are trying to do a lot more than they normally do from a first run through in Mythic Plus. It seems like they have amped up the amount of things that every single trash pack is doing yet again in this expansion. And I think we've reached this like critical mass of the amount of things going on. And I want to echo something I think I even brought up on this podcast at some point, where it'd be really interesting to see what it looks like when a dungeon is designed where nothing can be stopped. Just so you could see, Blizzard could see maybe what the adequate amount of things that should be happening to you is. Like when you allow yourself to stop mechanics, and then it's like kind of like an arms race. Now you're going to keep adding mechanics so stops make sense. It's like, think of a raid boss, right? Think if like your tanks, 2 people in your raid at tops, had the ability to kick a raid mechanic, right? Where you can just add it, I don't know, on a 2-minute cooldown, one of your tanks can just interrupt any single raid mechanic, right? That would be 10 times harder to design fights, right? Because you're not allowed to interrupt raid mechanics, you can curate an experience of what a fight is supposed to be and feel and play like without worrying about you stopping the boss from doing things. It's why Shadow Meld doesn't work in raid, right? So you apply that to dungeons. I think over time they're like, man, they're just like stopping everything. Let's just keep adding more. I would love to see what it looks like right now when you do a dungeon at a decently high Mythic Plus level and you just don't stop anything. And Blizzard sees what these packs individually are all trying to do to you. It's crazy. Now, I don't think you're ever going to run into a point where nothing can be stopped, because there's a bunch of stops in the game and Blizzard wants to design things for you to use them on. And there's also not a scenario where you're going to stop every spell ever, and that's why they're doing this. There's some middle ground that makes sense, and I just don't know what that looks like, where people aren't complaining that stops are OP while also like Blizzard isn't happy because the dungeons don't do anything, you know? Like where is the middle ground of what stops should even look like in WoW in a dungeon scenario?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that they need to... Packs in Mythic Plus feel best when you, as a person, can be assigned to a task, and you have one task, and you're doing that task. You know, whether it's, okay, here's a mob, it has a volley. Every time your kick is up, it will also volley. You are the sole person responsible for that kick. Or, hey, this mob does a move, you have to stun it. You have a handful of stuns it'll cast every 30 seconds. Make sure it doesn't go off. The biggest problem and the biggest offenders are when, okay, this mob has a volley that you have to kick, and it also has a bolt that you have to sometimes stun when the tank doesn't have defensives, and this other mob has a lethal cast, but it's a really fast cooldown, so you need 2 melee kicks on this, and then it just, I feel like they just need to, like, any single mob or thing that's going on in the pack, they just need to think about like one individual person's toolkit. Like I think whether you're doing a high key or a pug, I think every single pack should be solvable by putting a marker on the head of the mob and being like, you're responsible for this. And then you just go into every pack and you mark the mobs and then you do what you need to do. And obviously that leaves some room for, if a high key group wants to pull 4 freaking packs and give the rogue 7 jobs, you do have the ability to do that, but you should never be in a scenario where you pull one individual pack and it has 7 different jobs that you have to do and people are coordinating between 2 mobs. Again, like maybe a boss, right? If a boss has a kick that goes off over and over again, and that's the mechanic of the boss is to coordinate, but for a trash pack to be like, you know, for instance, in No Good Offensive, you have the guy who bolts and you need 2 melee kicks on the bolt. You have the Tempest that goes off that channels, you have to stop that. You have the pulsing damage from the totem, and it's just like, the purges from the little mobs, and the tank is kiting, and you're picking up the orbs, and it's like, this is one pack. Like, we're not doing some crazy thing here. This is one individual pack of mobs.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that a pack should always be solvable by like a decent group of people knowing what's going on, getting assigned a marker, being told that's your mob, and then yeah, because high key groups we can add difficulty to these packs, and we will, right? Like,
and they said they want you to.
Yeah.
They said that in the interview. They were like, we like high key groups applying aggressive strategies to pull more.
The problem is that right now the aggressive strategy is Sigil of Silence, right? It's like, well, I'm pulling 10 mobs. Each mob has 2 casts. There is no mathematical solution for this that involves something other than me using one button that stops every mob in this pack, right? Like, Sigil of Silence just has to get involved in that to make those sort of super big pulls work with this sort of design. But if it was instead like, yeah, there's a couple of mobs here that just kind of beat your tank, right? Like, you go into a pack of 5 mobs, and there's like a caster, an archer with an ability you want to stun, and then like 1 mob that buffs mobs in the pack or something, and then 2 mobs that beat your tank up, right? You go into that pack in a pug, and you can put a marker on one thing, and you can stun the other one, and you can do it, right? And then if you're in a coordinated group, you can be like, all right, we're going to pull this with this, and here's how we're going to handle all this stuff, and that is really satisfying. I always remember, like, Kragmaw's room in Underrot. One of the reasons I loved Underrot was that you could go into Kragmaw's room of Underrot, and you could pull any combination of stuff for as much as you had coordination for. So if you were in a pug, you could just be like, yeah, we're going to fight 1 Bloodswarmer and 1 maggot at a time, right? And that's what we're going to do is we're going to have 1 maggot to worry about. We can either dodge it or stun it. And we have a Bloodswarmer that we're going to kick, and it's going to be beating somebody up. And then we're going to pull all the rest of the stuff as we go. We'll throw free kicks on lashers or something. The rots don't do anything. And then if you're in a high key group, it's like, okay, we're going to pull 3 maggots here. The rogue is doing star and skull and blah, 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 blah. And then if we also will be chaining it, we're going to focus a Bloodswarmer and then chain into another one. And like, that is such a fun type of room that scales so nicely to different groups. When all the packs are just already overloaded with too many mechanics, it becomes brutal for low-key players because 1 pack is just already too much. And then also it just means that high-key groups, like high-coordination groups, can't add 2 packs together because 1 pack is already 80% of your capacity. You can't add anything more onto that without going over,
What makes that under room? I completely agree with you, by the way. Also, Underrot's Kragmaw room is insane, and more things should feel like that. What is it that keeps normal trash packs not feeling like Kragmaw's room right now? Is it because there's those little blobs in Kragmaw's room that, like, some of those mobs just don't do anything? Is the Dragonflight, the War Within version of Kragmaw's room, is those blobs also just have raid boss mechanics, and that's the problem? Or, like, why haven't we had that again?
That room's also a little special because none of the mobs are linked, right? So you can literally mix and match exactly what recipe you want in there.
Yeah.
Whereas
I wish they would do that more.
Packs, yeah, like, I love that.
After you mentioned it, like, I really think that's a cool thing in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to move on from Mythic Plus stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this was a huge interview. We are definitely not going to cover every question in this episode.
Hold on. I have a short rant. I'll try and go very quickly. But
okay.
There's a couple things that I don't like about their interview. I'm trying to get to them real quick. So the first thing is, first of all, shout out to them for doing the interview, answer the questions. It's very good, blah, blah, blah. Preface
and shout out Wowhead, too, because the questions were very good. Like, really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there's this little rant in here where it's basically like... for groups that are pushing the limits, we understand you. It makes the whole week feel dead when the affix is bad. Who's responsible for that affix? Blizzard, the World of Warcraft team. And it's basically this huge rant, right? And I feel like it's so dismissive of the players, because it's one thing if they were like, hey, we realize these affixes aren't that fun, right? And it's like, okay, well, they acknowledge the problem. But almost the way that they word this is so dismissive, like, we understand why you're frustrated, as if to say that, like, we're right, like, these affixes are great, but we understand why you're blaming us, even though we know it's our fault. And it's like, or it's not our fault. And I feel like I don't really like this, and to me it's not very conducive to a agreement, like, oh, let's work together and figure out a solution here. Like, okay, if your girlfriend or partner comes to you and has a complaint and is very angry and says they don't like this, and you tell them, I understand why you feel that way, yeah, they're not going to be happy. That's not the right answer to that question. When, someone is like, hey, this is bad, stop doing this. Like, I understand why you don't like when I do this. It's like, no, I felt it was very, very dismissive of an answer. I know, obviously, like, there's a whole lot of words here, and hopefully that wasn't their intent, but I did get kind of turned off.
It's always
by
really
that.
hard with text interviews too, rather than other videos. But I feel so I didn't get that vibe when I read it, but I will tell you another time that I did feel the exact same vibe you're talking about, and it's when they made that post in Shadowlands where they were being like, "All right, well, you can swap covenants now." The whole like, "All right, we get it, we were wrong. Covenants are going to be
Oh my god, I know the line you're thinking of.
Yeah. I hope I don't butcher this, but it's like the line was something like they went through and just said all the reasons why we're gonna be able to swap covenants now, and everyone's like, yeah, of course, we were telling you this for like a year, and then they threw in this line like, while the experience at the beginning of Shadowlands specifically wouldn't have been as good if you couldn't have swapped.
Yeah.
It's like,
and it was just like there's no way you think that. Like, that's so every single part of the community does not agree with that. And it's like you threw that in at the end just to be like, oh, yeah, by the way, it was the right thing to do. No, it was not.
Correct. Yeah, that is exactly how I feel about this line.
It's like what it was like, players were excited to experience covenants in the initial way or whatever that we designed that. It's like, no, they fucking weren't, man.
Yeah, Fronk, by the way, will find this quote, and he will put it on the screen, too. He likes doing stuff like that.
The funny that you say that, Dratnos, one last thing about, the excitement of covenants. There's literally a line in here that says, for the audience that is less looking to push rating and be competitive, and what is the excitement when you have the new affix introduced week over week? It's literally the same line. I don't know who's like, opens up their vault and is like, oh, Sanguine, yay! Like, who is excited? No, like, to say excitement about affixes, come on.
There were a couple more questions that like have some meat to them. I kind of want to rapid fire through two of them that I think just haven't been talked about in a while. And I know Dratnos will have some takes on this, and I'm not sure about Growl if you've ever even ran into it. But they asked about why PARRY still exists, and and they were like, that's something we'll evaluate on a case-by-case basis. It's like it's part of WoW. It always has been. But I really strongly think that PARRY is like just as outdated as like not being cross realm or cross faction. Like I think PARRY is just in Mythic Plus. You don't worry about PARRY. That seems ideal. You get into raid, some important ability not only just doesn't do damage, but it just doesn't happen like Colossus Smash. And it's like, this is such an insane punishment for something you should never have to think about. I just think the positional element of melee in this game is ridiculously stupid in raid, and it should definitely be gone. We don't have to talk about this for 10 minutes. I just don't know how you guys feel about it.
I think melee having to stand behind the boss is like, I agree it's sort of an old part of the game. I do think that you could get like 99% of the worst parries out of the way if bosses just didn't parry on pull for a little bit. Like if the first 10 seconds of a boss fight it couldn't parry, that would remove most of the complaints that I hear.
Yeah, but then why does it exist,
Well,
like,
because they want you to be behind Smolderon, right? They want you to have your little icon where it's like, okay, the tank is here in front of the boss, the rogues are here behind the boss, right? And like, I don't know. I think if they really
but a lot of
that,
times proper ways to do bosses like Smolderon is actually going in front of the boss for a while and like rotating around the boss correctly when you're dropping fires. And like, why should a melee be punished for that? It's so.
You gotta tell the melee in my guild that, because they do not do that.
and that's a problem. I don't know. I understand why it exists. It's supposed to be like a skill differentiator, but really it's just more annoying than it is cool.
Yeah, I agree with you that like often you're supposed to just stand in front of the boss as well. Like the skilled thing to do is to be there, and then you're getting parried some percentage of the time, and you just are feeling awful. Because like there are other things that are in the realm of parry that they've just taken out of the game, right? Like bosses resisting your spells, right? Like that used to happen. They could that happened all the time. And they took that out of the game for equally, I think, good reasons. So
yep. Yeah, exactly.
I would rather see parry gone. I do think that a compromise could be not parrying on pull, so at least because a lot of the worst parries are on pull because the boss is being moved and swung around. So at least that, I think, could be, if they're not going to give us the whole thing, that would be good. What's the other question you had a quick chat about?
Well, at the risk of really, really contradicting myself on previous episodes, they asked a raid buff question, and I know we were getting mad at the Patreons for continuing to ask about raid buffs, but they had a very ridiculous answer to a raid buff question. They basically WoW had asked, the same thing, like, hey, raid buffs are a thing, and they mentioned 2 classes not having one, which is technically true in DK, and then 2 specs of Shaman. But I've always felt like just when you're talking about reasons you would bring a class to a raid, putting DPS and Ellie Shaman in the same sentence as DK is nonsense, even though they technically don't. Like, Grip is just a very real thing. Yes, Blood does it more than the other ones, but whatever. Like, it's still a thing. DKs are in raids all the time. Ellie Shamans aren't, right? Let's just fucking stop putting them in the same sentence. All right, so their response was like, yeah, we think maybe we'll do something. It doesn't always have to be it's the same answer as always. We don't always have to like add a raid buff to make stuff to make you want to bring classes. And I think they had a line where it was like, if you're putting in a mythic raid group, you should want one of every class, and then once you have that covered, you should look at who is available. And then they said, well, we don't want to do another raid buff because then it would heavily force less choice. It would heavily force less choice in composition forming. And that's just blowing my fucking mind. Because you want to have less choice in composition forming? I'll give Fronk a link to this, a spreadsheet that I made that shows the elevation of raid buffs from expansion to expansion, and how in this expansion they added 2 Evoker raid buffs, and they added a second Paladin one. Why? Like, why are you're saying, oh, we can't, sorry, Shamans, and I guess you could make the argument for DKs, but not really. We're not really going to give you a raid buff because we feel like it would give you less choice. Yeah, you're right. There really is only like 5 raid spots right now you can make a choice on. But that's because multiple specs have 2. How can you say that if that's the case? It's just pure nonsense. And just as they said before, they said this exact line: you should want one of every class in your mythic raid group. Hopefully this is just fully understood by anyone at Blizzard who makes these decisions. You do not need a fucking shaman in your raid group. If that maybe that's not understood, like, to usually enhances Wind Fury Totem, 1 spec of Shaman is enough to put them in a raid comp, but there is no need for them whatsoever. If you're looking at like participation metrics, there's only 1 spec. It's total nonsense. You have to give them something as soon as possible. And if you're worried about raid comp restrictions, maybe remove the second raid buff from multiple specs in the game to include the one that you have not included in this. That's my only take. Again, doesn't have to be long.
Yeah, I've been having fun. I've been having fun using Shaman as a bit of a punching bag recently. I don't know. In one of my videos, I did the chapters for the patch notes, and I changed the mage section, which was the longest one, to Shaman, JK Mage, lol. And yeah,
they like that.
Yeah.
I've been making up shaman abilities. Like, I'll tell, like, guys, didn't like check the notes. Didn't you see they buffed like Totem Slap? And they're like, that's not a fucking real ability. Like, they're also, shamans are the one class that are the most in need of class and spectre reworks, and they're losing their mind because they're not getting changes every week. And then on top of that, they're just like, hey, so there's just one class that doesn't have a raid buff. And I know how raid buffs affect dungeons too. We've talked about this a million times, Growl, without you on the podcast, by the way. So like, that just so you know that rant has been had. But yeah, I can't fucking believe they said that.
I found that answer to also be not. I think as well, like, DK Evoker as well. Like, the Evoker raid buff isn't really a real buff, right? Like, when we think about why you're bringing some classes, like, Evokers are pretty likely show up in any given case, but there is a pretty big difference between things like Chaos Brand, where the first Chaos Brand is 100% value, the second Chaos Brand is 0% value, and then you think about stuff like the reasons why DKs, Evokers, Shamans would get brought to a raid. Almost all of the things that would cause you to bring those to a raid, the first is like it's better, but it's not as much better than the second, right? The second is like 80% as good often.
Evokers are a little different. So you do need 2 Evokers in your raid as long as they are specifically
Yeah, that's
Aug.
the Aug situation, just because Aug is top damage, whatever thing.
It's so if you want an exact number, at least going into this last raid, I guess not exact, but somewhere. So if you were to look at whatever the top DPS is, and probably any patch, but in this patch specifically, your first 2 Aug Evokers you bring to a raid, if you're playing optimally, are about 30% better than that.
Which is something that only does happen in the top some double-digit number of guilds, that Augs are actually doing that much damage, which makes it an especially fun problem. But yeah, very true. But then, like, Dev and Prez are left in that same spot where Ellie and Resto Shaman are, right? Where it's like, okay, technically we're Evokers, but we're not the one that has the guaranteed raid spots in the top-end guilds. it is an interesting one as well, because like Chaos Brand is good in any guild, right? Chaos Brand is great in my World of 1000 guild, but it's not good in it's as good in the World of 100 guild as the World of 1000 guild, right? Whereas the Aug Evokers, they fall off tremendously in value as you go down. I don't really have a point there, except I do agree with you about the raid buffs. It's I found that answer to be sad, because basically like, yeah, kind of, we think we can do it. Like, surely this hasn't worked the last 10 patches where we thought we could do it, but we think it'll work this 11th patch, that we're going to have something that's going to make it so that you're going to play these non-raid buff havers. All right. Other questions here. Growl, was there anything outside of the Mythic Plus section that jumped out to you as well? And any other of these?
I have two that are perfect for him. I have two that are perfect for him.
Okay, send him his way.
He can lead us off. So WoW had asked about the healer changes in Dragonflight. And this is a big there's been multiple YouTube videos that I know Growl's actually reacted to, and it's just been in general points of the conversation in the WoW content creator universe about, like how healing used to look, at least in a raid, back in even Shadowlands and BFA, where like you can look at bosses like High Tinker, Mechatork, or Sludgefist or whatever, and it's like people's health is very minorly going down and very minorly going up, and can sit at 40% for a while, and that's normal. And like in today's day and age, if that were to happen, your group was dead 20 seconds ago, right? Like that could never happen. Only like Disc Priest really burst healed. Everyone else like kind of all their power was in their kit, and their cooldowns were like slight buffs to that kit, but it felt like a more conducive like healing up and down experience, rather than now where basically relative to now, every single healer in Dragonflight feels like what a Disc Priest used to feel like. Like when you pop your cooldowns, you're just topping the raid until your cooldown's over. And that's leaked itself into dungeon healing. They've done multiple health buffs over the expansion without buffing healing to account for that, and hybrid healing and shit like that. But they just basically mentioned what they're going to do in the War Within, and they said that they're looking at it, but I just don't know, Growl, if you have any large takes around any of that.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, nobody cares about healers, so they've addressed a lot of the problems.
This podcast cares about healers.
Well, I mean, they've addressed a lot of the problems. They've talked about affixes. They basically didn't really do anything when it comes to healers yet. I mean, one of the big things that people have to understand first about healers is that ideally what makes for good healing is, low amounts of healing, low power level, but also low incoming damage. So you're managing your mana, you're making decisions, you have time to think, more of like an RPG sort of experience, right? As opposed to button mashing you have 7 different short cooldowns, you know what I mean? And it's like you're just mashing all your buttons as they light up, every single heal does infinite. It's okay if maybe some classes sort of have that archetype, but I think they just need to slow down healing in general a lot. The problem right now, and this is really, really nasty in M+ in the beta right now, and I'm very worried about this, also a little bit of a problem in Raid, the amount of damage that your allies do, your classes do, and the amount of damage that the monsters do is so high relative to the amount of healing that you do. And it feels like it just is artificially like they have to deal so much damage and make things so lethal because everyone's defensive kit is so insane now with the new talent trees. And I know we've had many defensive creep rants. Ultimately, the thing that worries me the most is in the discussion, they address self-healing and defensives as sort of like one whole grouping. I don't really think a lot of people have problems with off-healing when it comes to, a Shadow Priest using VE or a Ret Paladin deciding to use their WOG or whatever. It's not really about the self-healing, it's all about the defensives, and it's the fact that and because healer power is so high, they have to do these raid events that your whole party is taking massive, insane amounts of damage, like 3 times their health bar over the course of, maybe like 10 seconds or even lower than that. Well, the problem is when you have a 10-second defensive that you can use every single time that happens, you're literally like reducing the raid damage by half just by pressing your defensive or whatever. And it creates not only annoying gameplay where you don't have agency as a healer to make good decisions, it's just whether or not your defensive, your DPS presses their defensive, but also it creates like a very weird experience where in a high-end setting, it's like you either press the defensive or you die, and then in a low-end setting, it's like you don't even know what people are doing. Maybe some guy presses their defensive, maybe some guy presses it late, and because there's so many defensives and you have to press them early and often over and over and over again in order to live these encounters. It's just like, I don't know, it's just not, in my opinion, like not good gameplay. It's just like, well, as a healer, you're just kind of like mashing your cooldowns when you're supposed to, and they infinitely top the raid and do 60% overhealing. And then as anybody else in the raid, like you have these weak auras that just blow air horns, and you have to just mash every defensive, and you have 7 different buttons, and I don't know. And they basically didn't address anything. Like they kind of talked a whole lot of stuff and they said things, but looking at the damage patterns of M plus and like from what I've seen on beta, like it's just more of the same. Like unfortunately, they're one last thing is they're doing this thing where now they realize how crazy defensives are. So what do? They keep doing these absorb mechanics, right? They're basically like they did it on Smolderon, they did it on Fyrak. Now they're doing it in the new raid even more because they know, well, if you do this, you know, they can't make raid damage lethal because everybody has defensives. Well, let's just put tons and tons of heal absorbs. And heal absorbs, while they can be okay sometimes, I feel like they're very, very problematic in terms of visibility on your raid frames, especially with the default UI. And so I don't think heal absorb is like a great mechanic for them to like overuse in a bunch of different fights.
Yeah, they actually mentioned the defensive creep thing. Like that was another entire question. Especially in regards to like the delta between players who use them effectively versus players who don't is just such a massive difference in survivability now. It's the main reason why in a lot of ways it can be harder to heal a lower key than a higher key because you're playing with players that less reliably use these insanely powerful tools on the things that matter. And yeah, I mean, they basically said, yes, we understand we can't really make any huge adjustments to it now, like before the expansion, I think. But they said, here's what they said. In some ways it becomes a little bit of a tax. So I think we're not in a position where we're going to go through and rip out a whole bunch of abilities for War Within in the coming weeks. But I think we're looking at what an ongoing disarmament there might look like. I think it's important some players have outs situations, blah, blah, blah. But like, I think this is just my opinion. I don't know if my opinion matters, but if you're a Blizzardman, I think this is... there's probably a list of things that are more important than this that I'm not thinking of, like just general well-being of the game. I think this is like the single most important thing you could do for the game would be looking at what that disarmament of defensives looks like and doing that as soon as possible. It sounds like something that would happen in a expansion because it's a big undertaking, but like the fact that hero talents are adding them makes me think that the problem we experience in Dragonflight is going to be even worse. And some of them are insane. Some of them are giving renewing blaze to another player. That's obscene. Some of them are like, I think DKs take 20% reduced magic damage or something passive with one of their things, like just nuts stuff. So I think this is as important as anything in the game. It trumps everything else we've talked about, that because it affects everything in PvE. I have no idea how it affects PvP, by the way. Don't care about PvP at all.
Well, interesting you say that about affecting everything in PvE, because there's one specific line here that is extremely scary with that regard. And that line is, there is a lot of value in world content and smaller group content, certainly delves in the War Within, having these defensive tools and really being able to manage your own survival better. So I am very worried that they're looking at these survival tools and these self-healing tools and thinking that, oh, these are great for casual players, like these are great for people who are playing solo, and I don't think that is all the case. And I think that, again,
That's
I've talked
true.
about
Do you think casuals want to bind 3 more defensives? There's no fucking way.
No, yeah, they're, in my opinion, they're totally off base here, because I think when it comes to solo content, you basically two-shot every mob in the open world nowadays anyway. And when it comes to delves, you know, my personal opinion on delves is it should be role-tailored content, and it shouldn't be about, as a DPS, how well you can survive. And I think all these hybrid talents don't really make sense at all and aren't fun and are worse gameplay, but that's a rant for another day. But I very much worry that when I saw this line about delves, I'm like, oh no. Like, they're looking at hero talents and thinking like, oh man, all these little passives that'll give you free health and free damage reduction, like this will be great for these high level delves when you're soloing with Braun or whatever. And I'm just like, God.
Yeah, I do feel that. I think as well, like, there's so many defensives that are just so like you're telling me that somebody in the outdoor world or in a delve is going to use hover for a 30% decaying DR and is going to get value out of that, like out of their defensive, or like feint also, like or mirror images defense. I guess that one has taunting, so that's actually a really valuable one in the open world and in delves. But I don't know, like a lot of these defensives aren't even cool. Like we've gone from a lot of classes having, you know, maybe this is the one cool defensive that like, oh yeah, mages have ice block, right? And now it's like, no, mages have like, you know, 5 different buttons that they can press to live something, but all of them are like, so it's so much less cool than it used to be, I think. So
what do you mean it's so cool? You don't love the class fantasy of, as a shadow priest, in the middle of your void form pressing flash heal and fade and power word shield, like you're the master of the powers of holy and darkness. Like, it's so cool to press flash heal in the middle of your cooldowns and power word shield every single 20 seconds to just live. Like, that's so cool, Dratnos. What are you
Shadow
doing?
Priest famously love that, which Fronk is, by the way, and he loves all kinds of bad things.
that's right. that's right. Okay. All right. I think we've done a good job of covering as much of this interview as we will in this episode. There's a bunch of questions that we didn't cover, so Frank will put some links to the interview and stuff in the description, and I'm sure all 3 of us, you can watch our Twitch VODs or our YouTube channels or whatever to find us yapping about them ourselves too.
I think Dratnos and I both have full yaps of like this entire interview. I think actually.
Yep, 7-hour yap for me on last night.
You had a
right
7-hour
after
yap on this?
I slept in. Dratnos yapped for 7 hours, hosted me. I yapped for 7 hours. It was and of course, the chatters were ready. They were there for it.
Shout out the chatters that were there for both of those 7-hour streams and heard the same thing twice.
I did my YouTube video and I broke it into 3 parts, and I was like, okay, I'll do the M+ one, the raid one, and then the rest of it. And at the start of the rest of it, I was like, okay, this will be a bit of a quicker one. We'll just do a quick read through this hour-long video, just unavoidable, no counterplay.
Oh, I'm gonna watch that.
All right, everyone in the comments, type how many times that you've listened to the patch notes now from different creators. Are you on your 3rd time after listening to this PoddyC? Is this the 5th time for you? Let us know.
All right, so this week we've got a Patreon question from Anonymous that says, "Hi, I'm currently a survival main. I really want to improve as a player in M+, but I struggle to get into keys because there's a lot of competition. I try to push my own keys, but they often get depleted, and I can't form a group because my schedule is inconsistent. Should I just start foddim rerolling so I can get more experience in higher keys, or just quit the game? Also, what's your favorite sandwich spreads?" All right, we'll save the sandwich spreads for later. But let's start with should this person foddim reroll, quit the game, or is there another option?
I have something quick before we give them I think you guys will be better at answering this question than me. I just want to say, if you're a survival main, you're going to absolutely love the new expansion. As far as I can tell from people who have played specifically survival since the last 2 weeks of Hunter Reworked, is apparently that spec is cracked, and it is super fun. So you may just be able to keep playing survival, just wait a little bit longer. But that's all I have to add.
Growl, what's your take on like foddim rerolling? I know I've seen you on old Jangby quite a bit recently. That's a pretty foddim reroll.
I mean, I think a lot of people are against foddim reroller. Look, if you like playing your crap class and that's your identity, that's fine. But realistically, even if there's a god comp, there's 5 different classes across 3 different, 5 different specs across 3 different roles. Chances are there's going to be one of those that you'll find fun. In my opinion, the friction of dealing with Group Finder and having to do all that stuff is just not worth it to me, especially with how great gearing is nowadays, that I'm just such a big fan of foddim rerolling. It's not to say it's not possible. If you really love your class or spec, there are answers, which we'll probably get to in a second, that you can do. But, I mean, like, you might literally foddim reroll to a class and be like, actually, I love this. Like, you know, you go from survival to like, oh, why don't you just try Resto Druid for a season? Like, what could the worst that happens, right? You just don't like it, and then you play something else. Like, but who knows? Maybe you really, really like it. Like, maybe it's a refreshing way to enjoy M+, and now you don't have to, you know, especially if you're on a tight schedule. I don't understand these people that have a tight schedule or have to play at erratic hours, not wanting to play the best possible spec for pugs. Like, if all you're doing is pugging, like, why the heck would you play a class that people don't want to play with?
Yeah, I think that there's some angst that people have because they want to play the specs they want to play, and then there's anger at the people that are stopping them from playing the specs they want to play, and that often gets aimed at the pug community and like the content creators like us that are telling people, you know, giving them the tier lists, and we give them the tier list, and then they know that they can't play Survival Hunter or whatever, and then they know not to invite Survival Hunters. And that, I think, leads to there being pushback on this idea of like, well, if we just answer everybody's question about this with no, don't fodder reroll, like we're fighting back, right? And by doing that, we're gonna instead have a game where everybody is playing their own spec and everybody's getting invited. But I don't think that that's a realistic path to that happening. I think that, there's definitely going to be some amount more FODM favoritism than there, needs to be for like success rates or whatever in top end groups. But the amount that is there, like with the current meta this season, is somewhat justified, especially if you're trying to pug, 15s and higher and stuff, like, and you're trying to get invited as like a non-vengeance even hunter tank. It's fair. Like it's on Blizzard. It's not on the pug leaders. It's not on the pug community. And in any given season, like, yeah, you might have a pretty balanced season, but you also might not. So if you have to kind of decide for yourself, like, am I going to have more fun if I do 5 keys a night as a FODM spec pretty reliably, or I'm going to have more fun if I do like 2.5 keys, 3 keys a night, and I'm spending an extra hour in Group Finder trying to get invites on my favorite spec, right? And like, I don't know. I mean, the answer could be either one. I wouldn't blame you for taking either answer, but for me personally, like FODM rerolling is by far the more satisfying one of those two choices. So that's what I'd recommend in that spot.
I mean, there's always going to be friction, right? Like the way he worded the question almost like spelled it out for us, right? Like he basically said, I try and push my keys, but they get depleted. I can't form a group because my schedule is inconsistent, and I can't get invited because of my spec. It's like, well, like when it comes to group organized content, you have to give in somewhere, right? You have to decide where you want to give in. Is it, well, I'm going to reroll every season to play a FODM spec? Is it, well, I'm going to be that guy that bugs tanks and, hey, tank, want to play tomorrow? Eventually people will say yes, and you'll have people to play. You don't have to have a group that logs in every time to play. Or who knows, if you want, you'll be the guy that pushes up your own key, but sometimes you're going to end up with some crap key and be in the depths and be 3 key levels below what you want and spend the whole afternoon trying to push your key back, right? There's some friction somewhere that you have to give in because it's a group content, right? Everyone sort of has to give a little to get a little when you want to play with a team, and you just have to decide personally for you what area do you want to give in. And me personally, like, I don't really have affinities towards specific classes that often to the point where like I want to play a class that's crap. So in my opinion, FODM rerolling is the easiest friction to give into, but again, if that's not something you want to do, you've already spelled out, well, okay, well now you need to push up some keys sometimes if you deplete them, or you have to try and form a group and organize things even though your schedule is a little messy. Like, you sort of spelled it out already, all of the things you need to do. You just got to decide, what you want to do.
All right, how about this favorite sandwich spreads part of the question? Max, what's your favorite sandwich spread?
Man. So, I'm not a big spread guy. I'm not a big, like, mayo on a sandwich guy. In fact, I actually, like, kind of just never prefer having mayo. I like a nice, like, on a sandwich, like, maybe, like, a nice olive oil blend with some spices and, like, some red wine vinegar.
A sophisticated palate. Holy moly.
Well, I'm basically just describing Mike's way from Jersey Mike's, I think. But that's like top tier as fuck. So I like pretty much go for something like that, I think.
Growl, how about you? Sandwich spread?
I'm kind of lazy. I think the biggest thing with sandwich spreads is like mixed stuff. I'll just kind of like open my fridge and like whatever I have. Like, what is it? Is it the Big Mac sauce or whatever? That's basically like mustard, ketchup, and mayo. Like, that's one. It doesn't work on all sandwiches, but like if you have something that you want to dip in, like some sort of potato thing, that's usually good. Or like you can roast up some garlic and mix it with mayo, or get something spicy, or like chilies and mix it with mayo, or like, I don't know. I feel like the most important thing with sandwich spreads is to be creative and like mix it a lot. Just like whatever's in your fridge, just like send it.
Growl's a gourmet cook, by the way. This dude like cooks himself food every day, like during his stream and stuff. So I would definitely trust him.
I try.
I just drink ketchup as my beverage on the side.
Yeah, Max, a very sophisticated answer as well.
Yeah, that's what I do.
I'll go with, I mean, I agree with both your answers in general. I'll add, as far as like, whenever I've been to Subway, the sauce that I've been surprised to like there was their barbecue sauce on sandwich. I don't know, barbecue sauce on sandwich is weird, but I thought it was tasty, and I found myself gravitating towards that.
I've done barbecue sauce as like a topping for burgers, like with like Swiss cheese. And barbecue.
Yeah, Swiss
goes kind of crazy. Goes kind of crazy. Yes, I also randomly A1 steak sauce on burgers also goes kind of crazy a little bit.
I have
Different?
not tried that. That
Yeah.
could be good. Okay. I'm willing to try anything. Yeah, cool. All right. Thanks for the question. Yep. Good luck with your choices and with your new sandwich spread options. I think that's about it for us this week. Growl, thanks so much for coming on to talk about all these questions. And again, links and stuff in the description where you can find Growl on Twitch and YouTube and stuff. The Adventures of Jangby. Yeah.
Podios,
Thank you very much for
everybody.
having me. Always happy to yap about M+.
Podios. Podios indeed.
We didn't steal that from the comments either. That's
Ain't no
pure,
way.
pure creativity.
Yeah.